Hello. Turn with me to James chapter 4 if you have a Bible handy. James chapter 4 is what I'll be speaking about today. If I were preaching this live, I might ask for a show of hands as to how many of you have had appointments canceled or some plans changed just as of late. And I would be willing to guess that most of the hands would go up. Are you currently doing exactly what you expected to be doing at this time? And if you're still going to work, some things have probably changed there. It's not business as usual. For most of us, our work has changed. And I know that for some, they have been either laid off or furloughed. For others, this stay-at-home rule is kind of like a paid vacation. But then for others of us, it means working even harder than usual or learning new ways to work. But most of us did not see this coming. And of course, I'm talking about the coronavirus. COVID-19 has changed the way that most of us, if not all of us, live. But is this really the first time that things haven't gone as we planned? I mean, does your life look exactly like what you had envisioned back when you were younger? Maybe when you were a child or a teenager or in college or just starting your career. Does your life look exactly like what you envisioned? Well, probably not. Probably not. Or maybe you can say, well, yes, this is exactly what I had imagined. My life is a mirror image of everything I had dreamed. Well, most, if not all of us, probably can't say that because things change. You can't plan everything down to the letter, and if you wanted to be a famous playwright, you might find yourself teaching freshman English. If you wanted to be a rock star, you might find yourself giving guitar lessons to 11-year-olds in the back room of a music store. If you were expecting to conduct symphonies, things didn't go exactly as you planned, and now you're teaching band in junior high. Are you exactly where you thought that you would be financially? Maybe by this point in your life, you expected that you would have made your first million by now. Maybe you expected that you would have more money on hand for retirement for the kids' college. Are you where you thought you would be in terms of marital status? Surely you did not believe that by this time in your life, at this age, that you would still be single. Or maybe you did not expect to be divorced. You really expect that life was going to be a romantic storybook kind of existence. Or maybe your marriage isn't exactly all that you had envisioned. You expected a long-term, maybe eternal honeymoon, and of course you can just have kids and fix that, and believe me, the honeymoon's over. But life is often different than what we had envisioned, and if you have a job or an income right now, then you're doing pretty well. You're doing better than a lot of the people in the situation right now. If you've got a job and an income, and I am so thankful for the things that have stayed the same. I'm so thankful to have a family with whom I can be quasi-quarantined. I am so thankful for a loving church family, although I only get to visit with them and see them digitally now, or what's the term? Anyway, digitally, virtually is the word I'm looking for. In James chapter 4, we learn of some traveling merchants who had everything planned out exactly how they expected it to go. They were going to go to this or that city. They had a city picked out. They had some very concrete plans, but they had not allowed for any contingencies. They have decided that the way they've planned it is just the way that it's going to be. James, in his letter to these Jewish believers, rebukes them for their presumption. In verse 13, he says, "Now listen, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money.'" Notice how these folks had it all laid out. They've got it all narrowed down to exactly when they expect to leave. It might be today, it might be tomorrow, but we've got it in that ballpark, and we're going to go to this or that city. We've got it pinpointed on the map. We have done our demographic research, and we have projected our success. We have projected our earnings. We've calculated all of this, and we know exactly how long it's going to take. We'll plan to spend a year there, more or less. We'll plan to carry on business and make money. And it's all sewn up. It's the perfect plan. We'll work hard, and everything will fall into place. And if it doesn't, it will just be because we failed to work the plan. But we know what's going to happen. And so these folks don't appear to have any contingency plan. They just expect that it's going to work out the way that they expect it to, as if they were the gods of time, location, and economics. How many people today have been caught off guard with this whole coronavirus thing? How many of us took this into account when making our long-term plans? Perhaps you intended to go to this or that city. Maybe you thought this would be a good time to go to the Big Apple, New York, New York. Or maybe a good time to visit Los Angeles, or to go to Disney World in Orlando, or maybe it's a great time to go to D.C. and visit all those Smithsonian museums. Well, maybe you just intended to visit relatives, but whatever you intended to do, it's off now. You're not doing it. We're not traveling, and travel may even become more restrictive as the coronavirus reaches its peak. People have had to cancel or postpone vacations, family reunions, conventions, non-essential medical procedures. Social distancing has also put a crimp in weddings and parties. And so some very large events have been canceled or postponed, including some global events which traditionally draw a very large number of people, such as the Tokyo Olympics, which have now been postponed until next year. And for the first time since World War II, the Wimbledon tennis tournament has also been canceled, and the Southern Baptist Convention won't be meeting. Lifestyles have truly been modified, and the schedules that we had and the time allotted to get things done have changed considerably. They've been greatly adjusted. The merchants in James, the merchants he addressed, were expecting to travel to a particular destination, to spend a certain amount of time there, and their projected earnings had already been calculated. And so if that doesn't work out, then now what? They had put all of their eggs in this one basket without any backup plan. And so the question is, now what? And now what is a question that a lot of us are asking. The time allotted for certain tasks or accomplishments has been cut short, perhaps. What we intended to do or to build or to teach has now been shoved to the back burner. We knew that the stock market was volatile, but we've never seen anything or expected anything like this. We knew there was risk, but and for some, in life right now, it's the waiting game. For others, it's all the way back to the drawing board, starting all over on something. And so a lot of folks are asking, now what? And it gives a whole new perspective regarding verse 14, where James says, why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. Have these words ever ringed as true as they do for some of us right now? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. Of course, we all knew all along to expect the unexpected, because that's the way life is. We knew that, at least theoretically. We knew that health, income, goals, relationships, and schedules could change in an instant. But did we really expect it, or did we expect it to be this extreme? If you're a person who loves the predictable, who loves to have everything going exactly the way it was planned, then welcome to a whole new reality. Welcome to the twilight zone. Perhaps you have lived through hard times of instability in your life, times in which you could just expect that the other shoe was about to drop any time, times that you could expect to live by Murphy's Law and worst-case scenarios. Life wasn't about what you could make happen, but it was about what happened to you. And when things get better, maybe you're a control freak because you are overcompensating for the times that you had no control over anything. Or maybe you learn to roll with the punches. Maybe you learn how to be flexible and how to help other people navigate a crisis, because crisis is what you know. Crisis is what you've lived with, and you actually function better in a crisis because that's what's normal for you. Normal isn't normal. And now you hope to make a difference because you've learned in your life that God is the only reliable constant. And this has become a message that you want your life to convey. Life is uncertain, but it doesn't have to be without meaning. It is uncertain, though, and there's nothing like a global pandemic to make this real to us. James says you don't even know what will happen tomorrow, and he continues, what is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. This uncertainty of life extends to life itself. None of us know how long we are going to be here, and death is the great equalizer. That's also true of the coronavirus. It is no respecter of persons in regard to rich or poor, or male or female, or black or white, or young or old. It doesn't care about your socioeconomic status. Those who've tested positive include everyone from actors to politicians, music stars, and even royalty. Some of them have died, and some of them are in critical condition. We never know when our time is up. And before this coronavirus became such a thing, so prominent, there were tornadoes in Tennessee to remind us just how fragile life is. And we learn from the Christian Chronicle, the newspaper for Churches of Christ, that several of our members in Cookeville, Tennessee, lost their lives, members of the Church of Christ. I read of one family, a young couple and their 2-year-old son in Cookeville, Tennessee. They were pillars of their local church. In fact, the wife was the daughter of the minister. And they had a little boy, a little 2-year-old boy named Sawyer, who wanted to be a song leader. He had his own little pitch pipe, his own little hymnal, his own little podium. And this entire family was killed when the tornado came through. And Sawyer was buried in the same casket in the arms of his mother. And we don't expect that. We don't expect that our lives will end on a particular day. We expect that we're going to wake up in the morning, we know what we're going to do when our feet hit the floor. We have expectations, we have plans. And we don't expect our life or the lives of young people to be cut so short, like a mist that vanishes away. While we celebrate what those folks might have contributed with their lives, we mourn the unmet potential. We expected that they would be around serving for a lot longer, and sometimes we are very much at the mercy of the weather, as people are with tornadoes, and farmers have always been to some degree at the mercy of the weather, especially back in the first century. Back in the first century, a farmer might see what looks like a cloud, a rain cloud in the sky, and it gets darker, and eventually it blocks the sun, and he thinks, oh good, it's going to rain. The crops need this so desperately. But then the cloud just disappears. It dissipates. It vanishes. And the unmet potential of that cloud offering hope and promise is now being mourned. Tragedies like death and drought are great equalizers. Rich and poor are likewise affected, as are the righteous and the unrighteous. No one gets an exemption. That's true with the effects of the stay-at-home guidelines that have now been in place for a while. We're finding that neither rich nor poor have very much control over things. Now, the rich typically have more control over their lives than the poor. I shouldn't say just the rich, but anyone with money. Money brings opportunities to manage more in your life than you'd be able to manage without it. Money gives us opportunities to do things and to go places and to buy things. It gives us recourse when we are mistreated. Money allows more recreational opportunities. And a lot of things that some of us take for granted, less moneyed people don't typically get to enjoy. But now the rich and the poor find themselves on similar footing. They find themselves in the same boat. People lacking money rarely, if ever, get to go to sit-down restaurants where other people serve you. They don't often go to sports arenas or movie theaters or concerts or theme parks. They don't typically travel by air, and who would want to be on a cruise ship right now? No one can go to the cosmetic salons or the gyms. And I was fortunate to be able to get a haircut before all of this started. But if this goes on for too long and the hair cutting places stay shut down, I mean, who knows? By the time I'm still preaching to you online, I might be preaching with a man bun. So, that would be something to see. You might want to stick around, come back for that. But what I'm saying is that maybe this temporary equalization we're experiencing might keep us mindful of those who lack the opportunities that some of us have. Maybe we'll be more compassionate. Maybe we'll be more generous because now we know what it's like to not have the ability to control much in our lives or to do much to entertain ourselves. Rich or poor, young or old, a lot of control has been taken away from us. But having as much control as Americans typically do, control can at times produce pride in us. We may not even realize how prideful we are or how independent we think we are until our dependence is exposed. James is really a good book for us to be reading right now. That's a good book for any time, but it's especially a good book right now because James is not just a disconnected string of devotional thoughts, but James has a context. And in that context, James addresses the tension between rich and poor believers. The gap between those groups was far greater back then than it is now. The rich were filthy rich, the dirt were dirt poor, and now these people find themselves thrown into the same body of believers. How are they to feel about themselves? How are they to relate to others who are in a different socioeconomic category? Well, James starts his book in chapter 1, encouraging those who go through all kinds of trials. And he's primarily talking about socioeconomic trials since he's addressing the rich-poor dichotomy, as he does in verses 9 through 11, where we're told that the man in humble circumstances may actually be highly regarded spiritually, whereas the rich man is going to pass away like a wildflower. The well-to-do's responsibility toward the poor is underscored later in verse 27, where we're told that the religion that God the Father accepts is that we minister to the widows and the orphans, who are the poster children for the disenfranchised and the marginalized. Chapter 2 forbids favoritism in our assemblies between one wearing a ring and fine clothes and the one who is poor. The chapter later defines the kind of work that justifies our claim to faith. And that work isn't just wishing people well, but it's actually meeting their essential needs. Chapter 3 defines wisdom in terms of humility, the kind of humility that does not have to be engaged in a running monologue. And then chapter 4 addresses the problem of envy, which the poor may have for the rich. Either the rich or the poor may find themselves in a state of covetousness as they lust or compete for the things of this world while bad-mouthing the competition. And that brings us to this morning's passage. It brings us back to this morning's passage where these merchants who think they have the world by the tail are acting like gods as they make their plans and project their futures. And then chapter 5 addresses a dispute between wealthy landowners who have unjustly withheld payments to their farmhands, to their day laborers perhaps, and justice will be served upon those hoarders who oppress those dependent upon them. And if our current unexpected situation teaches us anything, it's how dependent we really are on one another. From the farmer who grows our food, to the trucker who delivers it, to the people who cut our hair or educate our children. No one is an island. No one is totally self-sufficient. No one has any reason to be prideful. Pride fools us into thinking that somehow we are in control and that we can set our own agenda, as with these guys who intend to go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. But here's what James says about those making plans in verses 15 and 16. Instead, he says you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is you boast in your arrogant schemes, all such boasting is evil. We are humbled when plans go awry. We're reminded that we are not in total control. In fact, we have so little control. Now, that's no reason to stop making plans, because to stop making plans is to ensure failure, because you know tomorrow might just come. But will we submit our plans to God? Will we leave room for His sovereignty or His intervention? Will we pray that His will be done in all things? Not that He necessarily has a preference in all our decisions, but what if He does? Do we rely upon Him as opposed to our own ingenuity? The Apostle Paul often had plans to travel here, travel there, and he would often say to the people to whom he wrote, I'm coming to see you, if the Lord wills. I'm coming to you if the Lord wills. We don't always know just how the Lord works, or how He might even work through a failed plan, something that we intended to do that was thwarted. But we do need to set up and take notice when a crisis strips away our pride and our independence. We can trust that God knows best when we're going through various times and life experiences that are seemingly good or bad, and we sit up and take notice of the call to humility. In verse 17, James says, If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. The verse is often divorced from its context as if it applies to everything exhaustively. And while we might quote the phrase in broader context at times, in this particular context, its primary meaning has to do with humility and submission to God's will. But some people look at this concluding that if there is anything they have opportunity to do, ability to do, or anything that needs to be done, that they are sinning if they don't do it, if they're not the ones to step up and volunteer. And you can burn yourself out thinking that way. But I suppose it's better than being someone who has no conscience and is not conscientious about doing the Lord's work at all. But still, the Lord doesn't expect you to do everything. The Lord expects you to do your part, and that's all. But He does expect you to do your part. How might our current situation be used to submit ourselves to a deeper commitment to God? Well, as James said up in verse 8, come near to God, and He will come near to you. We at the Bright Road Church of Christ, or I should say we of the Bright Road Church of Christ, because it's not necessarily a place, but we of the Bright Road Church of Christ are about helping each other to draw closer to God. And we're about helping you to draw closer to God. And if I can help you with that, I'm here for you. I'm willing to pray for you. I'm willing to study with you. I'm even willing to baptize you if that's the point you've come to during your discipleship walk. But I urge you to humble yourself before God, because life is uncertain. It's like a mist that appears for a little while and then it's gone before you know it. Now, in regard to unmet potential, to die young doesn't necessarily mean that one's potential has not been met. They may have completed the mission that God had for them on this earth, but then even when we get to the other side, we will realize our full potential, for there will still be things to do. But unmet potential is what happens to those who live and die without the Lord. Surrender your life before it's too late.